Hi, welcome to another episode of the Supy Talks podcast. Today we have a very special guest once again with us, someone who turned from a restaurateur into a advisor and who built his own accounting services provider firm, serving over 600 businesses across the UK, the US, Middle East, Hong Kong, working with smaller food trucks all the way up to big groups such as the Big Mama Group. He brings in solid advice and support for everything accounting and finance related. So, Tom, welcome to the studio. Thanks for coming.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So tell us, Tom, what made you flip from the operator side to the advisor side?
There's a few things mainly. I mean, I absolutely love hospitality and restaurants, as you can see from my belly. So, it's always been something that was a lifelong passion, and I really enjoyed being on the operating side and working directly with guests, and had a wonderful career with Soho House. But as things kind of progressed, I wanted to build a business. I wanted to be involved in other people and supporting other people in hospitality, because I get a huge kick out of seeing people become successful. And I've always loved numbers. You know, my dad was a film accountant. He trained me how to do bookkeeping from a very young age. So I earned my pocket money. And I, really decided that accountancy was for me. So I trained up as an accountant. I was getting tired with 100-hour weeks that hospitality occasionally has, especially with new openings. And so I left Soho House to set up William Stanley, and we've been going strong ever since.
So you only work with hospitality businesses. Absolutely. But as an accounting service provider, we often see that they can serve many different industries, retail, manufacturing, etc. Yet you've decided to only focus on hospitality. So why is that, and what makes it so unique?
The numbers are the numbers. A debit and credits are the same whether you're working with a manufacturing business, with hospitality, with retail, but the people are very different, and the pressures that restaurants are under, hotels and bars, are very different from other industries. So it's as much that we wanted to be able to support restaurateurs and people working in the hospitality industry by being specialists, by understanding their problems much more, and by being able to help them. So we've then built around a suite of partnerships, like with yourselves and other service providers, so that we can deliver a really dedicated hospitality experience.
I see, that makes sense. So you've worked across a number of very well-known brands, Soho House, the Corgan Collection. What are some crazy stories that you've seen?
Well, there's been quite a few stories, right? Some of which that I'm not allowed to talk about, and are much better kept under wraps, particularly with opening some of the hotels. But I've got a few kind of fun stories to share that also got a bit of a scary side when it comes to the finances. So one of my first consultancy jobs after I'd set the business up was working with a steak restaurant near Covent Garden, and I was checking through the balance sheets, doing my normal kind of checks as I do when I'm trying to understand someone's numbers. And one of the first things that sprung out was a 200 grand food stock holding that
for
was
one restaurant.
For one restaurant, and the restaurant was doing 50 grand a week in sales. So it was astronomical, to say the least. And so anyway, we were doing our kind of audit. We were going through. The chef was saying, well, we have all this USDA beef. We have prime Wagyu. It's all hung in our special cellar. And was really trying to explain this is why his food cost was so good. Unfortunately, when we did an actual in-person audit and went through, a lot of the beef wasn't there, and it was, we had to have a very difficult conversation about some hungry chefs, and about really just making sure that we're being honest and transparent with the food costs, because I think part of the problem is that you can occasionally give in to temptation and not report your numbers exactly as you should be.
So what's when it comes to working together with the different other departments, operations, the chefs, etc., and then finance departments, in these kind of situations, who's typically the one that takes the blame, or is the one that has to resolve these kind of issues? What's the role of the accountancy firm in this case?
So we view our role very much as to hold a spotlight and to be able to support the operators and support the team on the ground, who ultimately are the ones who are looking after the guests, with the right data, with the right information and the right numbers. So it's not so much a blame game. Ultimately, it can be quite clearly obvious who is accountable for these items. And one of the things we like to work with people is making sure that you have each line of the P&L has an accountable owner and an accountable partner, whether that's GM, head chef, bar manager, etc. And then we try and work with them to make sure that we've got the right controls in place, the right tools, and these things can't happen again. Supy being a very key part of this, because having real-time access to those numbers, being able to see the inventory as it's ordered, being able to drill through and see what inventory is meant to be there and what's actually there, and make sure the stock count is accurate. Very important tool.
I see.
Yep.
And so you've seen the finances of hundreds of restaurants. What are like some common pitfalls that you've seen?
I mean, the common pitfalls are they're common and they're the same almost every time we come across them. So predominantly the things that we see that are the main pitfalls relate to staffing and making sure that we've got labour in the right place at the right times. I think it's becoming increasingly more difficult. If you look at how much national minimum wage has gone up by in the last 5 years, it's become increasingly difficult to staff at the sort of percentages that we saw definitely pre-pandemic and 10 years ago. GP and margin management being really the most critical lever that operators have got to pull at the moment. So that's making sure that your GPs are accurate, making sure your dishes are costed correctly. I mean, we still see it now in some of our more entrepreneurial clients, should we say, that things are costed on feel and understanding rather than really looking through, making sure that it's being weighed out, making sure that it's being properly costed. And then fixed overheads. I think tech has now become quite a large fixed overhead for a lot of businesses. And so it's making sure that you're not overspending for things that you're not needing and that you're getting value out of the tech when you've got it and you're not paying for an old loyalty system that's never been used.
So what's like the number one thing you see successful operators do that really sets them apart and gives them a healthy P&L?
So it's the same attention to detail that you have with your guest experience, with the quality of the product, you need to have on your numbers. You need to know those numbers. You need to make sure the systems are set up, they're reporting accurately. You need to make sure that you're working with your finance team so that those numbers are being reported on time, in the right format, in a usable way. And people who've got that same sort of passion for the attention to detail in all elements of their businesses tend to be successful. And I'd say that's a very common theme that we see.
I see. You've touched a bit upon the industry trends that are shaping hospitality as well. So in light of this, a big topic in the UK hospitality scene is always the UK budget. So now with the upcoming budgets, what does a good budget and a bad budget look like for you for hospitality?
Well, I mean, we can talk about a fantasy budget, a good budget and a bad budget.
What's the fantasy one?
A fantasy budget is that our chancellor decides to do something about business rates, VAT, and actually makes a real difference to hospitality. I mean, we have the highest VAT rate on food sold in restaurants in Europe. I mean, it's it is much higher and has a much bigger impact for us than it does elsewhere. Business rates, we pay more business rates than online retailers, and I think that's again something that has to be balanced. So that's on the fantasy side. In terms of a good budget, and again using my crystal ball and seeing what may or may not happen come the end of the year, I think a good budget would be no significant rise to national minimum wage, no change to employer or employee national insurance. And I think that's probably about the best that we're going to hope for in terms of reality. A bad budget is seeing what we saw last year and a repeat of that, which is an increase in national insurance again, which is the tax. So national insurance is the tax that an employer pays to employ people. It's also paid by an employee, but it's a slightly different tax method. And a further increase in national minimum wage that's significantly over inflation. We all need to have our earnings keep up to pace with inflation, but when you're going 3 or 4 times, that's where it starts to really affect businesses.
I see. So to run a successful, profitable business, I mean, there's only 2 realistic things you can do. You can either increase your revenue, decrease your costs. We're going to be talking a lot about decreasing costs and food costs, obviously, but when it comes to additional revenue streams or optimizing revenue, what are some good practices you've seen to either optimize the existing revenue that comes from selling foods or additional revenue streams, such as getting into retail, for example, as a hospitality operator? What have you seen that really works?
So we've seen a lot of people try with retail, and I would say that retail hasn't really been the significant driver that a lot of our clients hoped it would be. It definitely provides a minimal income stream, but it's not going to become the 3rd or 4th line on your P&L revenue, and that's going to make a big material impact. We've seen a much bigger shift towards private dining and private hire. So that doesn't just have to be your atypical, let's all sit down for a family lunch and let's do special occasions. That can be hosting small breakfast meetings for corporate clients or for businesses. That can be doing different types of events for the business and getting people in, whether that's hosting networking events or doing other stuff with kind of business groups there. We found that's been one of the significant stuff they've been able to do. Delivery, a lot of our clients have decided to pull away from that in some instances. If you're really focusing on the guest experience in your restaurant, not done well, delivery can actually really have a negative impact. So we're seeing that those that can do it in a way that doesn't impact the guest have a good experience with it. Otherwise, it's very much around the event side that we're seeing people keep growing.
Shortly after COVID, or during COVID period, we've seen a lot of ghost kitchens came up in the UK. In the Middle East, for example, we still see that it's actually a very viable business model. Do you see any future for it in the UK?
I think it definitely has a future. We've not seen the growth any as much in the last few years. If anything, there's been a bit of a decline in a few of the ghost kitchens. However, it is always home delivery. The convenience of it is always going to be a great business. I use it at least once a week. I'm sure you do too. The convenience of it is fantastic. So we are still seeing that is a viable business, but we're not seeing the explosion that we did see. And I think people predicted there'd be a massive shift. I think ultimately we all like eating out. We're all social animals. We like being together in spaces like that. So I don't personally foresee a massive change in that direction.
I see. So now we've talked about optimizing revenue. So getting back to the element of costs.
Absolutely.
Of all the costs that we see in a restaurant. So you've got, of course, a big element being your food costs. You've got your labor costs. You've got your fixed costs, your overhead, etc. In each of those domains, where do you see the most opportunity to reduce costs?
So the two biggest ways we're seeing cost reduction at the moment are margin. So, looking at your food and drink cost and working on your gross profit and on your margin with Supy. I think we're seeing that actually there are still significant gains, even very established restaurant groups, by implementing Supy. At the Corrigan Collection, for example, we're working to reduce our kitchen cost, our food cost. We're improving our wine GP. We're improving our drink GP. So there is a significant set of tools there that just come from better measuring and having real-time numbers, being able to drill through to the stock take, see what's actually happened, understand it on that side. So that's still quite a significant area that people have improved upon, and that improvement has continued, but there's still a way to go. And then the other big one is labor. Labor is now, for most of our clients, the most significant cost on the P&L. And managing that has become more important than ever. At the same time, we've had a very competitive market for people. Culture is very important. You can't just cut and expect one waiter to do the job of two or three. So it's about balancing it and making sure that service sections, restaurant layout, the way that you're structuring all of that is geared up for financial success, because it is something we have to really manage and we have to do well.
Have you seen any successes with automations and like robots delivering dishes? Do you see the future for that?
I've not really seen much on that way yet. I think perhaps the clients that we deal with are exploring it, and maybe their restaurant layouts need quite a lot of change to get there. But predominantly the clients that we work with, we only have a few that have really experimented with robot automation or with different systems. And I think in the right environment, typically in a QSR or a fast food business, I think you can do a lot with that. I think at the more traditional end, there's significant reconfiguration of kitchens, of service layouts, of sections that have got to come. So I think there's a way to go on that one yet. But it will ultimately, it will affect us in some way, right? So I think people will use robots where they can.
And kiosks, what do you think about those?
They serve a purpose, right? I think, again, if you're very keen to have a quick sandwich or something on the go, then a kiosk is a great way to get that. It can really speed up service. It can improve the guest interaction when you then have that with the person that's serving you after the kiosk. But they have to be in the right environment. We wouldn't put them in open house, for example, because it's not the environment. It's not the brand that the founders wanted to build. It's not. It doesn't fit. But if you were going to go to a Leon or a Pret, I think a kiosk has a great purpose there, and it actually can improve the experience rather than reduce it.
And when it comes to managing a P&L, one of the cornerstones of accounting,
Absolutely.
You've got a P&L. What do you actually do with it in terms of who should know about which numbers? How do you use it? Can you use it to motivate staff? We've seen some of our operators that we work with who they will use a P&L to do a briefing every day before a shift starts. What are some good practices of using a P&L that you've seen?
Great question. I mean, I think being transparent with the P&L is vital. So I think sharing that and making sure that it's publicly available to the right people. We probably wouldn't be saying use it for a briefing every single day. And that's just as much because you want to make sure that people are focused on the right things. I think if I look at a lot of our clients in the environment, if you were telling a waiter who maybe doesn't have the same level of training or education, hey, we really got to focus on every pound to save here, that can then lead to perhaps a little bit of behavior that our clients wouldn't want to have. However, weekly P&Ls, weekly management meetings, making sure that people who can influence it and have real ownership and accountability on the lines on that P&L absolutely should be transparent and open with them. And we have a tool that we enable people to do that so that they can see at the right people at the right time, drill through, understand those numbers. We run a training course called Finance for Non-Financial People that's aimed at chefs, general managers, receptionists, so that they can understand more how to read a P&L and what to do with it. Yeah, because I think we all assume that everybody knows where revenue is, where COGS are, and how it sits together. So I think it's something we as an industry have got to educate people a lot more on.
I see. Let's say that I were an operator with 2 or 3 locations right now, and I'm telling you, Tom, I want to grow to 10 locations by next year, let's say. What's like the core advice you would give from like an accounting point of view, an operations point of view? What do I need to get straight right now before I should get to that scale?
Your operating system. And one of the guys I work very closely with called James Bates from Murray in Liverpool and Manchester talks a lot about this, right? Which is you have to have a concrete operating system and an ability to run your restaurants and replicate that out, right? You don't want to have, if you've got 2 and you want to do something to grow it, you want to make sure that you've got something that is replicatable. And what I mean by that is, can that process be copied? Can that process be followed? Is it unique? Does it work well for the guest? And then how does that translate financially? Now, this doesn't need to be really prescriptive. I'm thinking you don't need to be telling people exactly how to do everything and every day, but you do need to make sure you know what that operating model is, what's replicatable, and how you can do that over multiple sites. We even see it with our very small clients, and I've got a couple of coffee shops myself, making sure that that's replicatable and that you can do that. And the thing that works really well in Great Portland Street, how do we copy that over to Chiltern Street and make sure that people are having the same experience because we know it works? We don't want them to have the same experience because we're going for something like McDonald's, which is we're doing that because we know it works and we know it's enjoyed and people are able to go through with it. And it's the same on the financial side, right? Because if you have a menu costing that works, if you have a way of operating that makes sense, then that's the same on a P&L. That's the same with your systems. That's the same to be able to wrap through. So that's the core of that advice, really, is to make sure that people are able to replicate it, are able to scale up. And it's very different running 2 sites, 5 sites, 10 sites. We've seen people grow a little bit, take a step back, grow again, take another step back, and keep going. If you're going to do 10 sites, you're not going to have 10 great sites in a row. Well, hopefully you are. But, a lot of what I've seen is that you are going to have 1 or 2 in there where you have a harder lesson to learn and bits to grow through. So it's I think it's those three key lessons, really. Take your time. Work from an operating system.
I don't have any plans yet, no worries.
Well, I think you'd be quite good at it, especially if you're using Supy. And then be able to replicate it so that you can scale up.
And in terms of the relationship you as an accounting service provider would have with tech vendors, not just us in general, what's a good setup that you've seen where accountants work well with, let's say, point of sales service provider, workforce management systems, inventory systems? Like what's like a good setup for you for like when you're scaling?
As in the ideal stack, or what works well in terms of our relationships?
In terms of the relationship.
Well, so it's exactly what we cultivated with yourselves and what we'd like to cultivate with our partners, which is we like to have a great personal relationship. That means if there is an issue, because we're all human, there will be the odd issue, there will be the odd problem to work through. You can pick up the phone, you can have an honest conversation about it, and both sides will work as hard as they can to resolve that problem. Right? I think a lot what we see in the tech world is that sometimes it's the customer's fault rather than the software's issue, which is the exact opposite of in the restaurant world, where it's customer, for most times, is always right. A colleague of mine, Travis Fish, speaks a lot about this, which is, it's the wrong way around in the tech world, right? We often blame the customer first. So I think when we're looking for a strong partnership, yes, the tech has to be fantastic, but it's more important that the relationship can be cultivated, that the person at the other end of the phone is willing, is receptive, and will work with people to fix those issues.
Yeah. So you've decided to partner up more with specialists, as in you've got every firm for one for inventory, one for workforce, one for point of sale. Why would you not want to work with one single vendor who does all in one?
So I'm a big proponent of the best in breed model, okay, which is that a little bit like Lego bricks, you've got to choose the right Lego brick for your business. It's got to all slot together. It's got to all integrate. But if I went to one of the all-in-one solutions, my only fear there is that you end up with doing everything not that well, right? If you go to Supy, you're going to have the best inventory management tool in the world, and that's going to be constantly innovating and investing and getting better as it goes on. It's the same reason we dedicate ourselves to hospitality. We can, we don't always get it right. We've got lessons to learn. We're constantly improving, but we know that we're dedicated to that. We've got a singular mission. We've got a singular focus. That's what we can then work on to improve. So it's the same with the best in breed model. If I've got the best workforce management tool that might work for you, it's not going to necessarily then work for the massive hotel around the corner. You have different needs, you have different wants. So by using best in breed, we can clip those together like a Lego brick and make sure that it works best for you.
When it comes to managing food costs, a bit of a different topic, what is a healthy food cost percentage that you see across, let's say, one operating type, which could be QSRs or versus fine dining restaurants? What does a healthy food cost look like?
So what we've seen is food and wage cost almost be merged into one now. Food and drink and wage cost almost merged into one. And what I mean by that is you used to very much look and hope for a 30% wage cost. That was always talked about. Brilliant. And if you were getting 25 or 30% on your food and drink costs, well, you were doing fantastically. What we've seen is for a lot of our clients, especially in London and central London clients, wage cost has gone up considerably. Probably at 35, again, if you're lucky at the moment. But because of inflation, drinks cost and food cost has probably come down a little bit. So you're still trying to hit that 60%, but we're seeing people who are really pushing, trying to get to 25% on food and drink cost, who are trying to maximize all the levers they can, minimize wastage, and tighten that up as much as possible. Because there's not a lot more we can do on wage. Right? Like I said about wage cost earlier, it's inflation and national minimum wage keeps increasing. The market's been quite competitive. It's a little bit less competitive at the moment. So we're all desperate for good people. So that's where we're seeing that blend and that kind of section come from. But it varies. I've got some clients who work to a much higher food cost because they're all about provenance and, it's farm to table, or there's bits about it that they really are pushing forward. And I've got other clients who sell a lot of coffee who maybe work to a 20% cost of sale and are doing very well accordingly. So it's got to be what sits well with your business and therefore what's financially viable on the back of that.
What are some good tactics we talk about having good systems for managing your food costs, but what's also some good tactics to, for example, on a bill level, let's say that you have a client that you're serving and there's a certain bill, what's a good tactic to improve the overall food cost or the overall bill size, for example?
So for us, from a food cost perspective, in terms of the tips and tricks to manage that, it's again, what gets measured gets done. So if you are using a tool like Supy, you're doing inventory counts very regularly, we would say weekly is kind of the ideal place to get to with that. You've costed out all your menu items. You know what's driving a good or a bad food cost, because we'll have what my old boss used to call a champagne problem, which is you sell only champagne in a week, you're not going to have the same drinks cost as you would do if you sold only house wine, right?
No.
So you've got to be able to manage that. You've got to be able to know and have a conscious decision as what's driving a certain number or driving a certain percentage or behavior. And then what we see is the world of the old upselling has sort of gone away now. You know, it's people don't want to feel that hard upsell of have more water, have more sides. But menu engineering has become very important, making sure that the layout of the menu is very constructive and conveys that message in a softer format. And we're seeing a lot of clients engaging with good offers and good ways of structuring things, so the consumer feels they're getting value for money. And it's the same upsell is still happening, but it's now a lot softer rather than me trying to get you to buy some water as soon as you arrive.
I see. What role do you see central kitchens playing, and what's like a pro and con of having a central kitchen? From what size onwards should you have one? What's your view on central kitchens in general? So
central kitchens work depending on the brand, or depending on the concept. If I think the Open House Group or Corrigan Collection, neither of those businesses would suit a CPU. Just the type of food we cook, the variety in each of those sites is very different and wouldn't work. A sub-brand of that is we have Boxcar Baker. Boxcar Baker, we don't have a CPU, but we have toyed around with maybe doing some central prep and then moving the prep out. So the baking is still happening on site, but we're doing that in potentially in a little bit of a different way. Conversely, we've got some of our QSR clients and some people else that we work with where it is exactly the same menu across 5, 10, 20, 30 sites. And prep is very important to be done in one regimented way, controlled in a very specific environment, and it's sent out accordingly. And that works phenomenally well. I don't think, obviously it sounds obvious, but I don't think you want to have a CPU if you're 2 sites and under. I think it's going to become quite financially irresponsible and potentially quite problematic. But really, at 3 sites is where we start to see people needing and wanting CPUs and delivering great benefit. I mean, if I take the delis, for example, another business of ours, we cook that all in one site, fresh every morning. So that's cooked in the Great Portland Street site and sent off to the Chiltern Street site. That was so that we could keep it as fresh as possible. We could keep costs in line with what customers were willing to pay. We're very keen to keep the sandwiches under £10, which is a crazy concept to even think of a £10 sandwich. And so we're lining it up in that way to make sure. So it's not a CPU per se, but it's a version of.
I see. And let's say for a restaurant chain that wants to expand, let's say they have 3 locations right now, let's say in London. Where else in the UK do you see great opportunities for hospitality?
So we see Manchester is a huge opportunity at the moment. Our second largest client base outside of London is in Manchester. Manchester's food scene is expanding at a rate of knots. Some fantastic things happening up there. A lot of clients opening in Birmingham. Birmingham seems to be really having a great moment. Edinburgh too, and then you've got Bristol's fantastic food scene in Bristol. And those kind of slightly more regional cities have still got, incredible cultures. They have incredible, food and eating, drinking environments and places to go. And so we're seeing a lot of businesses expand outside of London now, which is driving great.
What about international? Where do you see opportunity?
There's a lot of opportunity internationally. I think I would say, unfortunately, as we're both seeing, Dubai is a little saturated at the moment. I think you've got to really know what you're doing to do well in Dubai. Same with New York. I think these are not places one should go in casually. But we are seeing in a lot of clients opening in Miami, in other bits of Florida. We're seeing Toronto, more and more people doing stuff up there. I think there are other parts of the Middle East where we're seeing really, great growth. Because Dubai's obviously been much further ahead of some places for that kind of westernized eating and drinking culture. So that's spreading a bit more. And then I think there is massive untapped markets in China and India still. I mean, it's politically a bit harder, and it's not always as easy to go in as a either a wholly owned foreign entity or as a joint venture partner. But we're still seeing lots of people do franchise agreements, do stuff there. So I do think there's big international opportunities, further abroad. That said, our wonderful friends at Big Mama are doing fantastically in Europe, and there's obviously great stuff to do in Europe as well. So I'm quite bullish. I think we're probably at the bottom of the cycle at the moment, but the benefit of being at the bottom is that we can only go up from here.
That is true. What do you think about franchising in general?
So again, it goes back to the point about, have you got something that's replicatable? Have you got an operating system that works? Does it make money? Does the finances all hang together? So I think franchising is something we encourage our clients to do at the right period of time and to do it well. And I know that sounds obvious, but to do it well does mean right IP lawyers, spending quite a bit getting your brand book written up, making sure that you've got your SOPs, you've got your systems, you've got your processes, everything is well documented, because those, and I've been involved in quite a few franchisee partners who haven't done that, it does not go well. And ultimately it then ends up with taking the site back, an argument, invoking lease clauses and invoking franchisee clauses and brand clauses. It's very messy and very expensive, and nobody wants to be doing that. Yeah. And I've personally been involved in some launching of businesses in Hong Kong, Singapore, and China, and it's very easy for that brand to change quite quickly once it hits a local market, and then there's a large degree of localization that's needed, but you have to have something that's robust in order to be able to withstand that. Otherwise, it's not the same business or the same product.
100%. What are some good exit opportunities you see for hospitality operators? Should they always get acquired? Do you believe in IPOs for hospitality businesses?
I mean, I would love to see a more like a reverse crowdfunding IPO. So what I mean by that is that where there was a secondary market where one could trade shares in small hospitality businesses. The government have talked about a version of this it's called Pisces, but it's not currently available. IPOs work very well. You have to obviously be huge for an IPO. You have to be now in the hundreds of millions of revenue at least to get there. But it's a very exciting opportunity. And the one thing for an IPO that works very well for restaurant businesses is you're going to have retail investors who understand it, who know, who interact very well with it. We've seen a bit of in the UK at least, we've seen a bit of a decline in transactions recently. I think that's starting to warm up again. But acquisition and merger is the most viable exit opportunity. However, I'm being asked a lot about what's called an employee ownership trust, which is essentially where you sell the business to your team and to people that work in that business. And for definitely the longer, more established operator, that's proving to be quite a nice exit. I should also say there are some very good tax benefits to it too, which make it even more interesting.
Very important to know as
Absolutely.
well.
Wouldn't be me without it.
Any success? What's like the biggest success stories that you believe in that you've seen in hospitality and acquisitions?
I mean, the Soho House story is pretty incredible. Like when I joined, it was less than 7 clubs. It's now, I think, way over 30. The founder Nick Jones is an absolute force of nature and has built an incredible business that I think redefined British hospitality definitely, and now is obviously one to be watched on the world stage. I was, hugely fortunate part of my career to be there and to learn so much and to get much through it. I mean, Big Mama Group is another incredible group that's been built by those guys. And I think as an honour to watch Victor and Tigraine keep kind of developing it. And then there's loads of others that we're very fortunate to be a small part of and to help with on their journey. There's kind of too many to me to sit off reeling off names, but from like I said, I mentioned James and Tom from Murray. they're fantastic what they've built in the Northwest. I think in London there's Anchor and Barry, who I obviously work quite closely with at Open House, the Corrigan family at the Corrigan Collection. There are some just real great businesses that have been built that don't all get acquired, that don't all get sold, but still look after their team, that do well and continue to thrive.
So Tom, if there was one final piece of advice you could give to hospitality operators, what would it be?
I think it's to know your numbers, right? I think it's to find an accounting partner or find a finance partner that is willing to work with you, that is going to sit and explain those numbers, that's going to help you go through them and use them as a tool to drive your business forward. Numbers are important, but they are also an outcome of how your guests and how your team have been feeling and how they're doing. So it needs to be an integral part of the business that and that helps you drive it forward and improve what you're doing.
How can operators find you, Tom?
So williamstanley.co, just .co. You can find us online, drop me an email, or it's t.stanley@williamstanley.co.
Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure having you in the studio. Thanks for coming. Thanks for sharing your insights with the industry.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Really enjoyed it.